Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Chira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Chira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Chira Vanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ramo Hare Ramo Rama Ramo Hare Hare Toyam Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashwatara Sadashi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Kodi Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Gaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Sri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gogopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Vrindavana Dham Mathura Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Nugovardhan Dham Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Oh glorious the assembled devotees, oh glorious the assembled devotees, oh glorious the assembled devotees, oh glorious to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Omaganathi Manandascha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tashmai Shri Gurave Namaha Manchakalpataruviyascha Kripa Sindhavayavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Bhattaryaptorum mananam Bhattaryaptorum mananam Lokan vishyate jashaha Pati bhavad vido jasam Prajayam nanojayate Bhattaryaptorum mananam Lokana vishyate jasaha Pati bhavad vito jasam Prajaya nanujayate Bhattaryaptorum mananam Lokana vishyate jasaha Pati bhavad vito jasam Prajaya nanujayate. Anyone? Bhatyaraptorum mananam Lokana vishyate jasaha Patir bhavad vito jasam Pajaya nanujayate. Ladies? Bhattayaptavurumananam Lokana vishyate jasaha Patir bhavad vito jasam Prajaya nanujayate. Bhattari by the husband Apta urumananam of those who are beloved Lokan in the world Avishyate spreads Jasa fame Patihi husband Bhavad Vidaha like your good self jasam, of those whose, prajaya, by children, nanu, certainly, jayate, expands. Translation. A woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband. And a husband like you will become famous by having children because you are meant for the expansion of living entities. Translation responsively. A woman is honored in the world by the benediction of her husband. And a husband like you will become famous by having children because you are meant for the expansion of living entities. Report by Srila Prabhupada. According to Rishabdev, one should not become a father or mother unless one is confident that he can beget children whom he can deliver from the clutches of birth and death. Human life is the only opportunity to get out of the material scene, which is full of the miseries of birth, death, old age, and diseases. Every human being should be given the opportunity to take advantage of his human form of life. And a father like Kasyapa is supposed to beget good children for the purpose of liberation. I wanted to read the translation of Jai Radha Madhava. I forgot to do it before. We sing it every morning. I just thought I'd remind us of what the beautiful translation is for Jai Radha Madhava. Krishna is the lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Braj, the holder of the great hill named Govardhan, the beloved son of Mother Jasoda, and the delighter of the inhabitants of Braj. And he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Jamuna. So every morning you're singing that. So, in the purport today, Srila Prabhupada quotes from the verse from Maharaj Rishabdev, which says, one should not become a father or a mother unless one is confident he can beget children whom he can deliver from birth and death. So the real responsibility in having children then is to give them spiritual knowledge. Further on in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says, every human being should be given the opportunity to take advantage of this human form of life. Every human being. We often hear parents say they want to give their children every opportunity in life. It's a common saying, isn't it? We want to give the kids every opportunity. So the acharyas are reminding us, if we become parents, so we should pass on this understanding of the special opportunity offered by human life for spiritual inquiry. In the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that's the section where Maharaj Rishabdev is giving instructions. Srila Prabhupada says in a purport, the human body is like a junction. One may take either the path of liberation or the path leading to a hellish condition. So the human body, we have this choice, a junction. We can take one of these paths. On the path of liberation, one associates with and renders service to the Mahatmas. And on the path of bondage, one associates with those attached to sense gratification and women. I was thinking, the purport where it mentions this only mentions men trying to take advantage of women. Because in the traditional culture that Srila Prabhupada grew up in, it was unheard of for a woman to overtly chase men. So that's why it mentions men who attach to sense gratification in women. Nowadays we could change that warning to a warning not to associate with men or women who are attached to the business of chasing the opposite sex, either side. Rishabdev says, for those who associate with such people, with people like that, the path to hell is wide open. And on the positive side, Rupa Goswami has advised us, the greatest impetus for our spiritual life is good association. The thing that can give us the most benefit the quickest. Good association. I was thinking, we have so many young visitors coming here, people to do yoga and people who are interested and have heard of the yogic process, whatever, spiritual life. So many of them are aware of the idea of living in an ashram. Maybe they've sort of, the idea of trying it out for a bit appeals to them. An ashram is where you live. We've heard of that. An ashram is where you live, right, when you're on a spiritual path. But I was thinking, I wonder how many of them know that married life is also an ashram. It's not that all marriages can be considered an ashram. Married life has to be lived with that intention. The Grihastha ashram in traditional Vedic society was very important. It economically supported all the other ashrams. It's only in the household ashram where there's economic activity. Brahmacharis, sannyasis, vanaprasts, none of those orders are involved in earning money. So it was the householders who would support these other ashrams. And also, healthy, loved children from the household ashram would go on to comprise those other ashrams. The kids would become brahmacharis. When they grew up, maybe they would take the advanced order, the renounced order of life, or they became householders themselves. Most of them would. There could also be an affectionate relationship between the householders and the renounced orders. We hear that Sanatan Goswami was really loved by the villagers who sought out his advice on so many matters. He was aware and involved in the life of the villagers, and there was a love that existed between them. Vedic culture says, for civilized life, there should be marriage. Everyone knows between a man and a woman, there is a natural attraction. In any form of civilized society, then, there's marriage, some form of marriage. According to this Vedic tradition, without marriage, it's not considered civilized life. Everyone is aware of a natural attraction that goes on between the opposite sexes. Therefore, marriage is encouraged by the Vedic system. It is essential for a society where everybody is on a gradual process of elevation. Marriage is essential for that to go on. The Vedic model of marriage is one of cooperation based on a higher goal. Today's verse says, a woman is honoured in the world by the benediction of her husband. I was thinking when I first read that, someone who is a newcomer perhaps would find that sounded really patriarchal, that she's honoured in the world. Well, how? By the benedictions of her husband. It could sound patriarchal. But these benedictions are not one-sided. We'll hear in the later verses that go on after today's verse just how many benefits the husband gets offered from the wife. Just how many benefits he receives. We've all heard the expression, the wife is considered to be the better half of the husband. Srila Prabhupada even commented, the husband can address his wife as Devi, meaning goddess. He stated that a woman who is rightly situated is considered to be a representative of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. Traditionally, the wife ran the household. I remember in my own life going to a funeral service when my own mum died. The minister who was sort of carrying on the service, because there was all sorts of family members there, was saying that he'd observed having done that so many times as a minister, that it's the mother who keeps all the relationships alive between grown-up children, the next generation of kids, and the extended family. And he observed that When the mother dies, suddenly everybody notices there's a big hole because of what she's been doing, probably behind the scenes, keeping all those relationships sort of together. Suddenly those relationships can fracture. It's mostly the wife who, as the mother, teaches the children, and she's considered to be the first guru. In the 12th canto, Bhagavatam, it says, in this age the institution of marriage is going to degenerate. We know in Kali Yuga so many things are not improving, at least when looked at in perspective of spiritual life. It says that marriage will just be by agreement only. I was thinking these days, people have a relationship where they're described as they're described as being an item, isn't it? A couple, they're an item. But that situation can go on for years. It's not like it changes and they get married. They can just stay an item. Now we have a new term that someone can be the significant other. Still, it's not necessarily that you're going to get married, but that person is my significant other. Already, a marriage certificate is sometimes cynically referred to as just a piece of paper. That's not a really good basis to start a marriage, is it? When you're seeing the marriage certificate, there's nothing more than a piece of paper. I was thinking that because people have lost contact with religious traditions, not many people go to church anymore, so the basis of marriage, the real basis behind it, becomes lost. The real purpose within marriage gets forgotten. Sex and varieties of sense enjoyment within the family is misunderstood to be the goal of family life. Certainly there is enjoyment within family, the kids, whatever, the dealings between the husband and wife. But the real central issue, at least according to our perspective, the Vedic perspective, is one of spiritual life, cooperating together for a higher purpose. In Kali Yuga, men and women engage in conjugal relationships without the troublesome legal formalities and responsibilities that come with a binding relationship. Another of the unfortunate symptoms of Kali Yuga is selfishness. Selfishness seems to be on the increase. People looking after number one more and more. It seems selfishness, even between spouses, is on the rise. We hear of people taking advantage of their marriage partners from simple material gain. It's become so common to hear of older men leaving their wives for a younger woman. There was even a movie called The First Wives Club. Women who had stood by their husband only to be cheated on and abandoned in later life. And on the other side of the ledger, we hear of women resorting to using lawyers or whatever, also for selfish gain. It's not uncommon to hear of prenuptial agreements between couples, that even before your marriage has started, you're figuring out, well, what to do if it fails. You're not starting off with a whole lot of confidence that this is going to work. It seems to indicate a certain amount of selfishness and mistrust between spouses. For a young couple starting out, the costs involved in having kids in this day and age are significant, and they're increasing. I looked up, one government survey estimates it costs about $180 per child per week as a bare minimum. And it goes on to say that some families are spending maybe more like $800 a week on a child. When it breaks down all the things that you spend money on kids, most people would know, clothes, things to do with school. One of the big expenses today is childcare. So much expense adds up. It said that in Australia, they looked at the cost of raising a child up to the age of 18. So the government reckons it adds up to about a minimum of $160,000 by the time the kid's 18, and for some people more like $500,000. So there's a lot of money involved in young families trying to raise children. as I was saying, one of the biggest costs to a modern family is childcare. Even like there's a huge lobby out that the government should support childcare to help couples, because these days most parents are both working, or a lot of parents are both working. In most Western countries, there's this huge social experiment going on with young children in terms of daycare. In Australia, at least, I don't know about other countries, but in Australia, children from as young as 6 months can be placed into daycare. I noticed on a morning walk one morning, there's a childcare place in town. It says from 6 months onwards. Imagine leaving a 6-month baby in the hands of other people all day, for however many days a week. It's interesting that psychologists are warning that this is an experiment that has unknown results. Studies indicate that for kids up to the age of 2, they do much better with one-to-one care. And that care should come from someone who they know well and who loves them. Young children in long daycare show more stress hormones. These hormones are linked to the aggression and an anxiety found in older children who've been through long periods of daycare. We're talking here of just this time from baby up to 2 years old. They don't do well. Like if in a childcare situation, it's probably one carer to 5 or 8 children. Psychologists and doctors now think these changes could even affect the child with regard to how they're going to react to stress and anxiety later in their lives. So we could be creating a population of young people, a disturbed population of young people into the future. When Prabhupada was with us, he often commented on women being exploited in Kali Yuga. He encouraged women to see what is in their real self-interest, not to be exploited by unscrupulous men in the name of so-called freedom. The Sanskrit goes, strishu dushtashu. When women become polluted, that is, they're taken advantage of, there is unwanted population. And this is coming all over the world as Kali Yuga progresses. Another theme in the verse today is where Diti says to Kasyapa, because he's one of the progenitors, she says, because you were meant for the expansion of living entities. So Kasyapa is described as one of the universal progenitors. He's meant to create progeny. So here the Bhagavatam completely refutes the idea that living entities arose from dead matter, which somehow miraculously developed consciousness to form a single living being, and that over millions of years, somehow or other by mutation or whatever, these living entities that miraculously evolved from dead matter developed into the myriad life forms we witness now. This theory of evolution, this materialistic theory of evolution, it allows someone to do away with any feeling of sense of duty or a sense of gratitude to a higher agency. If everything just somehow came about by the chance combination of molecules, and lo and behold, suddenly with some material cause we have life, there's no need for any higher power to be involved. That we can explain it just according to mundane material forces. But the Bhagavatam completely refutes this. Krishna declares in the Bhagavad Gita, all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving father of all of them. The Bhagavatam therefore offers us a completely different worldview. All the different living entities were created individually, right from the beginning. It's described that these progenitors, like Kasyapa, unlike human beings who can only create, obviously, another human being, these progenitors can bring into being all sorts of different species under the higher power of Krishna. I've already mentioned in today's verse where it describes a woman is honoured in the world by the benediction of her husband. So Diti is deliberately using flattering words here. She's flattering Kasyapa by saying this because she wishes to have children. Specifically, she wants sons because her other sisters already have children. She says she will feel honoured by others because of her progeny. And then she goes on telling Kasyapa that because it's his duty as a progenitor, he will also become famous for creating living entities. So she's using flattering words to get what she wants. Diti, in insisting that her husband satisfy her desires, is described by Maitreya, who's speaking these verses, not today's one, but is talking about these verses. He's described that she is contaminated by the affliction of lust. But Prabhupada said, it's not exactly that she was afflicted by sex desire, but what she wanted was sons. So really her problem was lack of timing. He said, now's not a good time. But we understand that behind all of this is Krishna's divine plan to produce circumstances where Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha will take birth. And then Krishna's pastimes with these unbelievable characters will take place. And also, Diti then finds out that Prahlad will be born because of this situation a bit down the track. Then she's very happy to hear that. Srila Prabhupada comments that this lust born of sex desire is a contamination. So I was thinking, so why is it considered a contamination? So that we have to look at that within the context of a living being having been granted a human body that has a unique purpose. We hear from the Srila Prabhupada and the Vedic literatures repeatedly that a human being who is just on the path of sense enjoyment is doing just exactly what all the other animal species do. If all I'm doing is those same animal activities, then what distinguishes me from lower species? There are 4 animal activities that we've heard listed again and again. I'm wondering, any of the young devotees, do you know what the 4 activities are that all the animals do? Very good. Sleeping, mating. What do they do to look after themselves? They defend each other, don't they? They defend themselves. So we look at the civilization around us, it looks very polished. But ultimately, if you drill down, there's eating, sleeping, mating and defending is going on. All animals perform these activities. Perhaps they do it in a cruder fashion. They don't have nightclubs. They don't have penthouses. They don't have $10,000 mattresses. They don't have 5-star restaurants. Nor do they have sophisticated killing machines. I was reading a little while ago, you may not have heard this. You heard that companies like Samsung, they make our phones, right? They also make robotic killing machines that they're trying to market to governments to use should there become a war. Can you imagine? That already companies have developed these robotic killing machines, that in a battlefield they can just search out humans and kill them. Already we're getting close to that. We have drones, right, with cameras and stuff that just, as soon as they see a human in the wrong uniform. I remember hearing a class by Hridayananda Maharaj once, many years ago. He was questioning that what to speak of non-human species not having the same ability to advance their consciousness, like in the animal kingdom, that they don't have the same privileges that we do as far as consciousness. So he was saying, even in the human species, we see many different levels of consciousness. We've been speaking of marriage. So he made the point that for some people, just to remain married, even these days, even to get married was a great achievement. What to speak of further levels of sense control? Just to do that, for some people, is as good as they're going to do. But for somebody who's already on the path of bhakti, who's trying to reawaken their loving relationship with the Supreme Lord. Falling victim then to uncontrolled sex desire is simply just to lose sight of the path. It's not the end of the story, but we lose sight of the path. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Dhamma virudhod kamo shmi. Karma or lust, which is not against religious principles, that I am. So Didi is being dragged by the desires in her mind in the verse that Kasyapa says, now is not the time. But Didi is agitated by the desires in her mind. So I thought of that famous analogy that we all know of the chariot with the horses. So there's the driver, which is us. We're on the chariot, which is the body. The horses are the senses pulling us along. And between us and the horses is the reins. You know what that means? What's the reins stand for? Yeah, how to control the senses. So that's the mind. Depending on where our mind is fixed, how it's fixed or not fixed, depending on the quality of our mind, is how the senses will react. If the mind is under control by the intelligence, then we can decide where the senses will go, what they will do, how they will act. But her mind is agitating her because she doesn't have children yet. Many of her co-wives have children, so she wants children, and she wants it now. Krishna advises us that the mind is not a stationary, fixed thing. I think that's pretty obvious, isn't it? During the day, the mind can go through about 1 million different states. It's described that the thoughts that we have in a single day are in the tens of thousands. Like, I think you can have 1,000 thoughts just while you're standing waiting to get served for Prasad. Krishna says we have to learn to control it, not degrade ourselves because of it. The verse goes, a man must elevate himself by his own mind, not degrade himself. The mind can drag us up or down. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul, but it's also our enemy as well. And another verse says, for him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, the mind will be the greatest enemy. There's a class I was listening where Prabhupada said, where Krishna says to Arjuna, because you have conquered the mind, you have conquered the greatest warrior. Material science tries to argue that the mind is just a function of the brain. Because material science is always trying to argue that things can be explained just by material causes. But actually there was a scientist somewhere in Europe who was awarded a Nobel Prize, believe it or not, because he devised an experiment excuse me, that could prove that the mind is not the brain, is not part of the brain. Like they have these machines now where they can test and find any brain activity that's going on. So generally what happens is the mind thinks of something, and then a split second later, depending what the thought is, then the brain lights up. But first the mind thinks of something. He devised this experiment where he got somebody to think of doing something, and so you would see it light up in the brain a split second later. And then he said, now I want you to think of not doing that. Nothing happens in the brain. Isn't that interesting? That you decide something with your mind, I'm going to decide I'm not going to do what I just thought of, and nothing happens in the brain. So somewhere or other, the mind is separate. So I was thinking that in Kali Yuga there are so many disqualifications for spiritual life. There are so many difficulties towards just people living in general. When you read of the predictions in the 12th canto of what's going to happen down the track, it's pretty frightening. So how to deal with this, or what do we have to offer? So there's a famous verse, 1st canto, 2nd chapter, The translation goes, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, or the super soul in everybody's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who's developed the urge to hear his messages. It goes on. So just by hearing Krishna Katha, this desire for material enjoyment can be cleansed from the heart. So this is what... so if we hear Krishna Katha, what will be this result then? Because this Krishna Katha is a pure transcendental sound vibration, the result will be Shrinbatam Shvakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Vidayantoshto Abhadrani Vidanoti Surich Satam. Prabhupada says we've accumulated many auspicious things within our heart due to material contamination from many, many births, not only this birth. But he says, when we surcharge our heart with Krishna Katha, then the result will be Hridayantashta, which means the contaminations which we have accumulated in the heart will be washed off. Those contaminations will be washed off. You'll be cleansed of all rubbish things, he says. And as soon as all the rubbish things are cleared off, then you are situated in pure consciousness. So the perfect method to purify and change our hearts for this age, to change our hearts, is this chanting process, both in loud kirtan and in japa. We can't undo one by one all the nasty effects of Kali Yuga, which include marriage breakdown and so many other things. But individually and collectively, we can change people's consciousness by this chanting process. I was listening to a class of Vaisheshiki the other day, and he was saying that the perfect process for this for this changing our hearts in Kali Yuga is this chanting. Every morning, it's like a single, sometimes it's a battle between us and the mind, isn't it? To just fix the mind on the sound of Krishna's name. And at least during japa time, it's only between you and the mind and the holy name. There's nobody else there, hopefully, to disturb you. Like I notice myself when I'm chanting, you get your mind fixed on the holy name, you're chanting a bit, and suddenly you realize it's gone way over there somewhere. It's thinking about something totally you weren't prepared for. Bring it back over here, keep chanting, and that effect of chanting actually starts to become more and more pleasurable. Suddenly you realize the mind's gone over there somewhere. Bring it back again. So that's, at least for me, the process. Just keep rounding it up. And like Prabhupada advises us, we should chant so clearly, so attentively, that you can hear every syllable. So when I'm chanting, I'm trying to hear the syllables of the holy name and then round up the mind and bring it back again. Right. Hare Krishna Prabhus. Does anyone have anything they want to offer? Any corrections or any additions? There's one verse that I came up that I've looked for, that I found, which looks specifically at the entanglement of household life. Actually, before I go into that, I'll mention I was listening in a class. So the interface between the spirit soul and the gross body is the mind. The soul and the gross body. That interface is our mind, depending on where our mind is situated. We know all religious traditions, all spiritual traditions, all yogic traditions are involved in learning to control the mind. Krishna tells us to upgrade our mind and our attitude, not degrade ourselves. Our mind is what produces our attitude, isn't it? Attitude means what we are thinking. Prabhupada, I forget where I copied this from, but Prabhupada said, our gross understanding is our senses. Well, that's what we know about. What my senses are thinking right now, where they're situated. It means bodily senses. But above that understanding there is the mind. Above what the senses are actually perceiving. Like, we don't see things the same way. Depending where my mind is situated, I will see something differently to you. A businessman will see something in terms of, an economic possibility perhaps. But above that understanding there is the mind, the master of the senses. The mind, the master of the senses. That is subtle. Senses are gross, but the mind is subtle. This is really interesting. He says, I know you have got a mind, and you know that I've got a mind. But we don't know where it is. As I've been studying this, I've found it's quite interesting. The mind's on this subtle level. So where does it dwell? And above the mind, Prabhupada said, is the intelligence. That also we don't see. And above the intelligence is the soul. I'll finish there, Prabhupada. Thank you very much for your attention. Hare Krishna. Jai.